If you didn't, get the SMS or didn't get the email, please go and double check. From go and double check with the office, because you should get the SMS and the email, because I got the SMS and the email. I was telling CN yesterday, who emailed me. 3:18 I got the SMS, and then 3:20 I got the email as an indicator that the class has been switched. Oh, okay. Thanks, Gina. What is SS, the attendance page? And then do a appeal tomorrow. Student service or screenshot. Are you right in full lah, everybody? Okay. Yeah. Either that or there was a glitch with the system informing everyone. That's why the thing still shows as physical. The finals format. Didn't you all get an email yesterday? Format meaning what? Gina, can you? It's always, huh? It was always 12 questions, but choose 3. Where did you get this info from? Why did I not get this notification? Are you sure it's for IR 2085? Wait, exam format. I only got an email about change in exam format for PS1130, not for IR 2085. Wait, attachment. No, not this. Yeah, it was 1130. 3 of the following 9 questions. Can you forward me the email? Because I don't have anything else here. The only other one where I've got, thank you. The only other one I received, but this one is from the office, and was released. It was sent out to me on, was that yesterday, and they say that they informed you all on 21st February. The difference between the SIM prelim and the UOL main exam, right? So they've indicated that more details UOL will provide by 21st Feb. And then for the final exam, turning in is switched on for all the papers, and that type written is recommended, and it's closed book for sure, and that even the odd thing is that even though it is closed book, referencing is actually and citation is actually needed. Do you all get this email that explains the difference between SIM prelim and the UOL main exam? Yeah. So you'll notice that they actually say that if you want to quote statements and so on, right, you got to remember the sources by heart. So it's actually quite strict. The final exam, right, is actually quite strict. So use your own words to write. That means when you're doing up your notes, or when you are studying, or whatever you understand, right, use your own words. But please, the danger of using your own words. Thanks, Chinda. The danger of using your own words is really, the idea that you should not make sure that you should not make sure you should make sure that you do not have an issue of loss in translation, right? So that's the main point down here. Chinda, when I click on the link you sent me, it says I do not have permission to view it. That's weird. um, yeah. I'm subscribed to the IR 2085. Whatever courses I teach, I subscribe to it. Okay, never mind. That one I will double check lah. I don't know what's going on. Also, I'm very confused now when I see this kind of thing. Ours is called Summer 2022. Is ours Summer? Okay, never mind. I will double check lah. Okay. I don't know because I know they have different exams. I no cannot be autumn because uh I remember there are different exams as in there are some that are taken at different timing. Never mind, it's okay. We'll sort this out. Anyway, still got time. Still got time. Okay. Yeah. This one I have to because I asked for another course also. And then for that one they say, oh, the information is not ready yet and will be told in due time. So I mean, you see the problem is that the UL admin I mean the not UL admin, the SM admin is the one that sends me majority of information. And then sometimes they're also waiting for info. Yeah, 10 questions means you're more limited. You're correct, Gabriel. Which means all the more y'all cannot spot, no? And then why they would make changes like very close to the exam, right? Is is also another thing. That's why I'm not so sure. Yeah, I keep hearing this from people about last minute. Um, I don't know why or how. I shall not comment until I actually find out what's happening. Okay? Alright, because then you're just jumping into conclusions and so on, right? Okay, so let me just ask and then I'll get back to y'all when I find out. So as usual, everybody receives emails from me, right? Because right, yeah, okay. Because I use the e-global to email everyone. So if I find out anything or what, I will, since I'm not seeing y'all after this, I will email y'all back via the e-global lah. Right. The only problem with e-global is that it doesn't show me the sent, so I have to email myself. For everybody, it comes as BCC. Right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I will try to finish. Decent time. Today. It's a summary of some of the ideas. Right. I will try to finish at a decent time. I will not hold you. I will try my level best not to hold you back. I mean, let's be fair. Since it is a conclusion, revision lectures I cannot guarantee because revision lectures I got things to discuss with you. But today I will really try to let you off at a decent time, which I'm supposed to every time, but never. I apologize in advance if I sound terrible, or I apologize in advance if you have to hear me cough, but I cannot help it. I rather not be in class and cough in a physical setting because I think I don't want anybody to get sick. My ART is negative. All right, okay, but and I'm fully vaccinated, but still, I mean, it's a normal flu. I still do not, you know, I think it's not correct lah, right, for me to be in class like that. Okay, all right. Okay, so for conclusion, right, there's still some readings, but basically the idea with this chapter is a reiteration of a lot of things that I have mentioned in class, meaning that the past like the weeks that we looked at all the IOs per se, right? I always reiterated in class by way of discussion things like how you assess the effectiveness of the I/O or the function of the I/O based on things that we learned in lecture 1 and lecture 5, right? Please write this down, right? Write it down somewhere, okay? So that means what you need to remember is the logic of writing a connection, right? When you're assessing the effectiveness or the function of that specific I/O, like NATO or IMF or World Bank, all of these kinds, right? What you need to do is to go back to the fundamental ideas of what it is to be an IO. Role and function, they function as forums, they function as decision making uh, platforms. They are, sorry, they are devices, they are conduits and devices through which institutions are understood and reinterpreted and reiterated, right? The whole logic about how uh, IOs, they are independent decision makers, they're autonomous in their own right, right? The Barnett and Finnemore discussion. Okay, so basically, this is what this chapter is actually all about. It's actually things that I've been reiterating and reminding you the whole term, right? When we looked at individual when we looked at individual IOs, now we are just pulling things together, right? So that's basically what this discussion is about. Second thing, right, which I will do also, maybe I might do it first, is to look at the topics, the must-know topics. Where is it? Yeah, okay. I think maybe I'll do this first. All right. Before I do the other stuff, because the other stuff is like I can run through quite fairly quickly, but I think I want to talk about this first. Okay. Once again, okay. So what I want to point out to you here is the must know topics, right? Okay. Like I said, like like Chinda has pointed out, if there are updates to the assessment rubric, sorry, if there are updates to the assessment rubric, and indeed it shifts from 12 to 10 questions, then there are lesser topics for you to choose from. The lesser the variety, um, the more constrained constrained it is. Okay, so it's summer paper, is it? Oops. Thanks, Shinda. So it's summer paper. Okay, this one that means I really have to write in, because the last email I got, right, the one where they say assessment rubric is changed, was only one of the PS papers, which was like I said, 1130. The PS 1130. That one was an increase in the number of questions. The one was like last time was 6, and then now is 9 or something like that. Right? So not sure. Then again, the ones that I'm seeing is really okay. Wait, there's an updated version. Yeah, I keep seeing the same thing. It's 1130. Okay, never mind. I'll double check. Okay. All right. So yeah, like like Chinda is saying, if it's a lesser number of questions, that means there are lesser variety, lesser options, which means if you skip topics, right, then it is really very problematic. Okay, so you can't afford to do that. I would think that perhaps, since they are changing it like this, right, I would think that perhaps they may, this is just my guess, they may streamline questions related to the topics on the theories, meaning that it could be more of an open-ended question, right? And this is even if it is 12 questions. I mean, like, no matter how it is, right? I've always told you the questions on the theories like realism, liberalism, social constructivism, right? They need not come out independently of each other. It may be one of those types of questions like, which theory best illustrates our understanding of IOs, the kind of question where you need to look at a variety of the theories. So that's, how a potential exam question could come out. So, think of it in that way. I think, okay, the logic here is this now. Okay. We can't do anything if the rubric is changed, as in the number of questions are being tested. We can only say like, we can only grumble, lah, right? And say like, oh, it's lesser variety and so on. Okay. But uh it is what it is. I hate to use that phrase, but it is what it is, right? So we can't do anything. So we'll just deal with it. Okay, that's the only way to make yourself go with the flow, right? Okay, so don't be upset or don't get panicky regarding that. Okay, so you tell me 10 questions now. Okay, fine, right? That's the mentality that we should have. I know some of you probably will be saying that, yeah, yeah, easy for her to say because she's not the one taking the exam. I let me assure you, I feel just as stressed as you all are, even though I'm not taking the exam, because I also am concerned about, the like it's not about the numbers, right? But I'm also concerned, because like it's a reflection of, how well you understood the material. So the final statistics, right? How many passes there are, how many A's, distinctions, and so on. That is something that I also look up for. Not because it's a competition, uh, and we are looking at the numbers, but genuinely, I'm thinking about how it affects the way students answer questions, right? So that's what I'm thinking about. So, I assure you, I'm also just as stressed. And I also do not want to give you all wrong information, right? And I want to ensure that whatever I give you all is going to be useful. So that's the point now here. So, like I said, don't don't be over stressed. The point here is that we will just continue to study, right? So that's why some students were fretting in my year one class, and about how it is switched from open book to closed book. I think for y'all also, the closed book thing was a surprise, because when y'all all told me there is online, I also assumed there's open book. So yeah, okay, now it's closed book. It just goes back to traditional exams lah. That's how traditionally before COVID came into the picture. Just traditionally how exams were taken. So it's actually reverting to the norm. Okay. So don't let that tear you down. Okay. Let's just run through important areas that you need to pay attention to. Okay. So everybody go to slide 36 first. All right. Okay. I want to deal with this part first because I may have a little bit more to say. All right. So when you talk about study of IOs, right, growth of IOs, concept of multilateralism, please write down there also concept of global governance, because that's associated with multilateralism. Okay, so what you want to be able to explain is that look at the idea of IOs correlating to the number of states and the intensity of international problems that confound states today. That's basically the idea, right? Because that is why we even want to examine international organizations to start off with. Why are they there? Why have they proliferated? Proliferation is dealt with in chapter 5, right? But you can't divorce the study of IOs from proliferation. That's why I'm talking about it right now. So the logic really is that, as politics evolves, as the international political society evolves, as there are changes as a result of globalization, as there is an increase in interaction among states, right? Then you would see the need for platforms that facilitate, regulate interaction. Actually, that's what it actually boils down to. It is about the facilitation and regulation of interaction. If you look at dispute resolution mechanisms, what is that about? Where does that stem from? That stems from increased interaction, does it not? Right? Because increased interaction then sometimes leads to disputes or leads to, maybe dispute is a strong word, but leads to disagreement, right? So when it leads to disagreement, then you need to have a neutral third party to adjudicate. You can't, and why do you need a neutral third party to adjudicate? Number one is fairer, fine. Number two, you have to have a neutral third party to adjudicate because where does this interaction occur? It occurs in the international arena or the international environment, correct? So the logic is that if it occurs in the international environment or international arena, that is basically transnational. It goes beyond the borders of domestic states, correct? It's like, your NGOs navigating, same like IOs navigating, right? So it goes beyond the borders of the traditional state. And therefore, that is why you need to have, right, a neutral third party to adjudicate disputes. So it is about the interaction, increased interaction among states, right? It doesn't only start from globalization. You realize that this increased interaction among states, right? You witness it in the earlier periods, right? If you go to the history of IOs, which is chapter 5. So, 1500s, 1600s, so on. States are interacting with each other, right? And then you've got the sovereign and all of these things. So the rationale is that you're looking at uh sorry, IOs as facilitators, right? Adjudicators of interactions among states, regulators of interactions among states. So that's where you get the idea of multilateralism and global governance. Why these are important is because you need to think about it in terms of how states are always reluctant to abandon any notion of sovereignty, right? States guard their sovereignty very strongly. So if it if any kind of effort, right, to solve their own problems and international problems is going to compromise on their sovereignty, then that is something that they are not going to be very happy about. So the idea of global governance and multilateralism, it's about states who are willing to come together to solve these issues, right? And how these frameworks or these rubrics of interaction allow them to do so without compromising on their sovereignty. That's the fundamental explanation of what global governance is about. Okay, so that is what you want to highlight when you talk about global governance, multilateralism, coordination, right, of international policies in accordance to certain principles. Okay, and then what you also want to highlight is the logic of IOs in terms of authority, bureaucracy, effectiveness, legitimacy. And you want to also think about, the idea of pathology. Throughout this course, we've always emphasized on the idea of pathology. As in, what makes IOs tick? What makes IOs fail? Right? That is a core emphasis or a core understanding about the failure of IOs. Okay? And that is what you want to highlight. When you discuss the failures of IOs, is it because of an internal working? That means you have, sorry, that means you have resistance among states. You, sorry, not sorry, sorry. You have resistance among the secretariat. That's what I wanted to say. Resistance among the secretariat, all right? and or you have a scenario where there is IO overstepping its boundary. You have a scenario of IOs not being able to rejuvenate and respond to changes in the international political system. That means they're archaic, ARCHAIC, right? They're stuck in a particular time period and therefore cannot respond effectively to changes in international society. Do they fail because they are staffed with secretariat that are resistant to changes, or secretariat that are rooted in particular foundations, right? That means the educational foundation. They only want to address or solve issues in a very specific manner, right? So that is also another, way to examine it, right? So where does the pathology stem from? Or does the pathology stem from IOs that attempt to do too much, right? With the limited capacities that they have. When we talk about capacity, maybe write this down also. Capacity of IO is a couple of different things. Capacity of IO is affected by funding, money, right? Capacity of IO is affected by the reach that they have. That means where are they located? Who are the member states? What do they have jurisdiction in? Like, say, when we looked at ICC, for instance, right? The Rome Statute and the principle of complementarity basically hampered the effectiveness of the ICC, because the ICC now is not in an organization that is able to function over and above, right, domestic courts, but is meant to function as a complement to domestic courts, which means they cannot override the domestic interests of states, and they cannot override the domestic courts either. So that is also something that affects its effectiveness, right? Right. So this is basically what the resources refer to. And when you talk about capacity also of IOs, right? You're also looking at the founding documents and the charter. This is what we examined in things like UN. We examined in League of Nations, specifically UN, League of Nations. ICC also will be another one in particular. Why? Because what is indicated in the founding document that functions as a stumbling block, right? Or same thing with OAU, the sovereignty clauses in OAU, right? What functions as a stumbling block to the way the IO can exercise its authority and legitimacy? That is also part of the capacity. So things that tie its hands, placing primacy or priority on state sovereignty, which prevents the IO from exercising anything that is legally binding, right? So that also affects the effectiveness and the legitimacy of the IO as well as the pathology, right? States being able to exit out from IOs, say, like, for example, League of Nations was one, right? Where we highlighted that increasingly states did not want to states did not want to remain in an organization that required them to subject decision making to unanimity. They were very concerned about things like disarmament, unanimous decision making. They were concerned about how their sovereignty was increasingly being compromised, according to them, because they're wearing their realist lenses. But it was also during the time period that it existed. Fine, right? Because for the League of Nations, it was a social context and the environment that also had a big impact on the effectiveness of the organization. But when you look at other organizations like OAU or United Nations, where you've got sovereignty clauses that are inbuilt that prevent the the IO from exercising its authority and level binding resolutions on states where states have to follow, that becomes also problematic, right? So different when you look at pathology. I think this is important, right? You want to make a note of it. When you look at pathology of IOs, I think you need to really nuance. Hold on, sorry. Sorry. What you want to do is nuance your argument, right? Such that you are not referring to pathology as a generic argument, but you are looking at how different IOs experience pathology, different IOs experience failure. I think the temptation for students to just talk about it in a generic way is there. I've not seen too many sample papers from students here. Oh yeah, Anne and Sally, I'll get back to you on your outline. Didn't have time to do it yet, and I was not well. But I'll respond to you. Don't worry. I would. This is just a reminder. Whoever who sent me any papers, right? By the end of this week, that means by Sunday or Monday or so, right? I will ensure that I have returned all your papers. Some of it I've already returned to some people, right? There's a few more. I think there's 2 or 3 more. I will get it back to you, definitely before your prelims, right? Of course, also, like I say, you are free to send me up to 4. I mean, that's the standard across all courses, right? You can send, 4 sample papers, right? You can send it, before prelims, you can send it after prelims, you can send it closer to the exam and so on. Last year, I was still marking and returning papers with feedback, um, even close to the exam. So it's not an issue, right? I have up till, I think, May to input your grades, and, because there's a audit or there's a tracking thing uh, into Sim Connect. So you can still send. Sometimes I would say lah, like maybe send it, uh, do the paper by way of practice. That means like how you would do it in the exam, and then you send it to me. Okay, so yeah, that was what I wanted to highlight. So I know I'm seeing a lot of answers, or some answers, right? Number one, answers that are brief, too brief to the point where it's over summarized, and it lumps together. So when they discuss things like pathology or failures, right, it's all lumped together. There's no nuance. There's no explanation of how different IOs experience this pathology, right? And of course, it's important because different IOs experience it differently, right? So you cannot just lump it together and say, oh, IOs experience pathology. There must be specific examples related to it. Okay. All right. The idea of okay, I will do the role and function of IOs in this lecture itself. But things like say for example, when you talk about ubiquity, sorry, I know IOs are pervasive. You cannot run away from them today, right? They play an important role. Even like say for example, look at the UN. Look at the kind of role that it plays in current environment, current political system, right? It has gotten involved in majority of areas of daily life as a result of things like the sustainable development goals. So developed and developing countries alike have adopted the sustainable development goals and implemented them and working towards them, right, in different ways with different amounts of success and so on. But things like human security relating to personal safety, food security, employment, opportunities for education, gender equality, these are also things that are part of the range of issues that IOs address today. It is no longer, a case of issues from a state's perspective that is actually very structured by understanding of power and military, right? That's generally what we see in IR. It's a very realist, take to issues. So they come at, they understand issues from a perspective of state sovereignty, state power, military power, right? Economic power, and so on. Today, these are not the only issues that states are interested in, and therefore, these are not the only issues that IOs are subsequently interested in. Even if we look at IOs that emphasize the logic of power, military prowess, hard power, and so on, like NATO, for instance, right? What are they also part of? It's part of its collective security community. It is part of this logic of building an identity. What does it represent? European identity, values, right? So that goes beyond just understanding it from a purely realist perspective, right? Purely looking at things from a military dimension or a dimension of power and security, right? So that is where I think, the idea of ubiquity also, ties into the whole thing. It is not just, it's not just IOs that we think are dedicated to lofty ideals, but IOs basically are also involved, right, on the day-to-day execution of of things like human security. So I know we don't deal with this per se, right, as a specific chapter like new security issues, but I've mentioned these in class. Things relating to um, democratic accountability, sustainable development. Remember, I gave you all the additional set of notes related to critical versus orthodox development. Remember that, right? So, you know, we have environmental degradation, all of these things, right? We have actually, additionally talked about it, even though, it was not necessarily an official part of the syllabus, by way of discussing the areas that IOs, specific IOs, are involved in and so on. So that is, something that I think you should remember, right? And ensure that you put in, because new security, you may have looked at it in like year one when you did, IR 1011. But I think you kind of, if you do IR, you talk about interactions among states, interactions via global governance networks, problems, hot button issues, problems that confound states, right? uh, you know, you can't escape from the logic of these kinds of issues either. Okay, all right. Then, it flows into this discussion of realism. Okay, so when you look at realism, liberalism, social constructivism, I'm going to look at these three together first, right? The logic of all of these three theories, right, is to basically highlight to us that there are different lenses that we wear that help us understand how, why states behave the way they do, how, why IOs behave the way they do, right? You can't divorce state behavior from IO behavior, okay? So the theories are basically there to help us come to particular conclusions. That's what theories are about, right? It is a standard set of conclusions. That means, if you look at it from a liberalist perspective, right, then these are the expectations that we have, right, as to how the organization will function. If you look at it from a realist sorry, if you look at things from a realist perspective, right, then we have particular expectations, we have particular preset or preconceived notions as to this is how we predict states will behave, right? So that is basically what theories help us to do. They help us to form rubrics of understanding. They help us to form expectations. They help us to justify state behavior. Then they help us to justify behavior actions taken by IOs, right? So that is where you use the idea of theories. I mean, if you summarize it and you think of it in a very simple way, That is what these schools of thought and these theories are. It predicts that states, when experiencing, say, domestic troubles like what we saw, the Great Depression, the Great Inflation, 1930s and 1970s. What do states then do? They revert to protectionist policies, they revert to secret diplomacy, they revert to things that they believe will benefit them, right? So rather than to be dragged down by um, activities or failures, not failures, weaknesses of a whole group of states, they rather look at how they can benefit themselves. So states are thinking about the gain that they can get when they participate in international organizations, right? So states are considering all of this, right? How does the external environment look like? How does the domestic environment look like, right? And what actions do they need to take in order to ensure that their interests are fulfilled and they remain, primary. So that is the basic idea, how we understand where the theories fit in discussing, the states. Specifically, and number two, very importantly also, I feel that too many students make the same mistake of not including a counter argument in their exam answers that makes reference to the importance of the other theories. Say, that means if the question is on realism, or if your answer chooses to focus on realism, then what happens is that students tend to have a narrow discussion, a brief discussion. Brevity is not very good. I mean, if you've got 1,000 words to write, right, please use 900 to about 1,000. I'm seeing students who write like 600, 800. You think carefully. I want to point this out right now because I'm seeing it as a trend, both in my year one classes as well as in some of the year two classes. I mean, some of y'all in the year two class. Um, in the bid to summarize things or to write in their own words, right? Students are writing very short answers. 600, 500, 600 words. It's barely enough to address the issues, let alone the examples. And my point to you is that you would have heard me say this, in year one class. You'd have heard me say this before. Here also. Is your answer worth 100 marks? What you've written. Take a step back and look at what you've developed as an argument. If you were the marker and somebody presented that answer to you, would you give it 70 marks? Would you give it 80 marks? When you write an answer, right, you're writing with the intention that it can achieve a maximum of 100 marks, right? That's how we write. That's how we operate, right? That means I can achieve up to 100 marks. Sorry, I can attain up to 100 marks. Is your answer worth that much? Well, I'm not being sarcastic, right? I'm asking you to, please don't take me wrongly. I'm not being sarcastic. What I'm asking you to think about is that take a step back, look at your answer, right? Did you write enough content, right? I know it is quality over quantity. I know everybody says that. But you must have a certain amount of quantity also. In order for it to be of a particular quality, you cannot divorce the two from each other. If it's not enough material addressed, then where is the quality, right? I'm not asking you to write. In fact, I'm the first person to tell you, "Oh, please don't write a long story and unnecessary things, right? So the logic here is that you really need to think about how much detail you're including. And I see this particularly occur when students write answers on the three chapters, the realism, liberalism, and social constructivism. The answers are brief and they tend to always focus only on one of the three theories. Ask yourself, is it really true that only one of the three theories are applicable? The logic here is that yes, you do see states behaving more according to their realist lenses. Other students will say, no, you say states behaving according to their realist lenses, yes, but the proliferation of IOs and the reliance that states have on IOs suggests that states have, you know, accustomed themselves to a liberal world order. And because they've accustomed themselves to a liberal world order, liberalism is basically a theory that is very significant or strong in explaining state interaction and the importance of IOs. Others will say it depends on the social context, and therefore social constructivism and the reiteration and the proliferation of norms is what structures state behavior. But the logic here that I want you to remember when you're answering these questions is that singularly, is there any one theory that provides a comprehensive picture of state behavior and the use of IOs? And the answer is actually no, right? So generally in IR, you realize that there's no one best theory. But I'm seeing students write in such a way that it amounts to there being one best theory. And at year two, students are still falling for that trick in exam questions when they say realism, best illustrates the contribution of IOs. And I get answers that says, yes, I agree with the statement. Realism best illustrates. If realism best illustrates understanding of IOs, right? Why are states still relying on IOs? Why didn't the EU crumble and fall after Brexit? Fine. Why didn't EU crumble and fall after the rise of the Eurosceptics and the anti-establishment on the rise of the far right? Why didn't the EU crumble and fall, right, as a result of Hungary and Poland becoming extremely problematic and challenging EU authority? Why hasn't NATO turned tail and run away from the crisis that's brewing in Ukraine? Why has NATO come out very strongly with its alliance partners, UK, the US, and so on, and issue severe warnings to Russia that there'll be grave consequences to bear if Russia decides to go ahead with the invasion? After the fall of the Iron Curtain and the end of the Cold War, why is it that NATO found a way to rejuvenate, reinvent itself? While the name is a misnomer, it still represents a collective security organization dedicated to the defense of its members, right? Rather than just defense of the Euro Atlantic, right? But it's defense of the members, correct? So if realism is the only answer to all of this, then you should also see selective spurts of activity related to IOs, because the offensive realists will say that alliances can be built, states can come together to cooperate, provided they can get particular gains out of it. But the moment you see the mutual threat being annihilated, then they will revert to status quo, as in they would rather not continue to be part of the organization, right? So you should see, if that's the case, right, you should see IOs um, having lull periods and then having flurries of activity. But that's not what we see either, right? So how can you just effectively just rely on only one theory to answer questions related to IOs? That's my point, my question here. Okay, so that is what I need you to think about. Look at realism, liberalism, and social constructivism. Each of these theories, what do they contribute? What do they highlight? So if realism, highlights the logic of gain and the logic of the security dilemma, that in part goes to explain the pathology of IOs and the resistance that states have, right, in creating IOs that they believe would compromise on their sovereignty. right? If you look at liberalism, what is the main function of liberalism? Main function of liberalism is basically to look at the idea that this international system is so full of uncertainty and suspicion that you need to reduce levels of uncertainty and suspicion to allow states to come together, to coordinate their action, to solve problems in a collective manner, because individually they are definitely unable to do so. It highlights to us also that states do behave in a realist manner, right? So, what you need is to have things like regimes, right, to ensure that institutions are adhered to, regimes to ensure that states are going to commit to principles and practices, because that's what regimes are all about. It's about codification, right? It is about actors' expectations converging. It is about signing, not just signing, but about ratifying treaties that elicit compliance to a certain extent, right, among states. The IOs may not have teeth to enforce compliance and to bind states, but at least these treaties and these regimes are signal, right, that their cooperation is expected. Is expected. And you've got things, that are like the democratic peace theory, right, that also highlight that states, are more willing to interact with other states that are democratic. Democratic states don't go to war with with democratic states, but more likely to engage in conflict with non-democratic states. So the perpetuation of norms, the more pervasive democracy or democratic norms become, right? Norms associated with dialogue, discussion, placing the interests of many versus the interests of the elite, right? And in decision making and so on. These are all things that contribute to our understanding of how, despite states wearing their realist lenses, right, they still value in the IOs. If we look at social constructivism, right, basically what does that tell us? Social constructivism tells us that states react to the social context that they function in. And the logic here is that states are going to examine the political and policy context. States are going to look at, is this environment that I'm existing in and functioning in, is it full of opportunities to cooperate, or is it full of hostility? And they will calibrate, I like that word. They will calibrate their response accordingly, right? If it's full of opportunities to cooperate, then they are likely going to behave in a liberalist manner and they will cooperate with the other members. If it's hostile, then they are likely to abandon ideas of multilateralism, abandon ideas of global governance, function in a bilateral, plurilateral manner. Constructivism basically tells us anarchy is what states make of it. So basically, the idea is that states are basing their activities or engage in activities, right? Not purely out of not purely out of self-interest, right? But their identity and therefore their interest evolves alongside the social context, right? Okay, so that is the logic of the construction of the state interest, the mutual constitution. Social constructivism also highlights to us. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let me drink something. Wait, sorry. Let me finish this slide and then we can do the break, okay? I don't want to break up the flow. So the logic here is that social constructivism also helps us to understand that IOs perform a very important role in norm entrepreneurship. Sorry, norm entrepreneurship. You heard that? Okay. All right. So the idea where IOs, they basically function in a way sorry, function in a way where they reiterate particular norms, right? They purport or they put forth norms. States may not basically be aligned to these norms, right? Meaning that it may not be something that states naturally have convinced themselves about. But what happens is that social persuasion and influence plays a huge role. States repeatedly reiterate the norms, and what you see is that even when IOs repeatedly perpetuate, reiterate the norms, and states, even if they may not be in line with these norms or these beliefs, they may be socialized into doing so. So remember, every time we talk about this, I thought the answer is X. Everybody say the answer is Y. Either I convince myself and believe that the answer is Y, or I don't want to rock the boat. I want to be considered as a legitimate member of society, and therefore I subscribe to the norms as well. So it is about influencing, changing, affecting state behavior via these norms. Okay. And the last thing about social constructivism, right, is the logic about understanding that IOs function as independent, autonomous actors in their own right. So Barnett and Fenimore's argument about bureaucracies, the importance of IOs in terms of them being autonomous, independent, being able to make decisions, right? Uh, while we say that they do not have teeth, in the true sense of the meaning, right? We highlight that they basically have the ability to function as autonomous actors, right? Uh, like how you see IOs performing actions or playing roles that otherwise states cannot play, right? So the logic of how, say for example, they are norm creators, they collect data, they define particular aspects, like only when an IO defines what is a refugee, then you can understand what a refugee basically is about, right? Okay. Or IOs that come up with reports on the environment, or reports on growth, development, statistics, and so on. These are things that states cannot do. Last one, chapter 5, right? History of IOs. So basically, what you're looking at is the logic of where did we start to see IOs becoming significant. So, the implication or the importance of things like treaties, right? Like Congress of Vienna, Utrecht, Westphalia. And that chapter in particular is to highlight that interaction among states is not something that is new. Like, if you're familiar with the globalization theories, right? There's even, this discussion. We've got different phases of globalization. Globalization 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, right? So interaction among states is not something that occurred suddenly in the 1970s as a result of globalization. Of course not. It intensifies, yes. It becomes more frequent, or the nature of interaction changes accordingly. Yes, agreed. But the logic really is that all of these interactions start way back. And there's a shift, remember, when you look at, all of these earlier treaties like Congress of Vienna or Westphalia and so on, how did things look like? Eurocentric, right? It was basically a case where the European states were considered to be the great powers, and other European states were then the members of these IOs. And slowly you started to see invitation of smaller states, invitation of non-European states, right? That became significant and started to play a role in IOs as well. And slowly you have, IOs that are all encompassing, right? Like what we see in terms of the United Nations today. Previously, you might have seen a divide, right? That was Western versus non-Western states. Today, the main divide is developed versus developing states and the roles they play within the IOs, right? But basically, this is the evolution of IOs. But the logic is that at the end of the day, the fundamental remains, which is that states, they do understand and they do wear their realist lenses, and they do understand that there are certain costs to bear should they choose to seek membership in IOs. And these costs are exacerbated with particular IOs. Like say for example, an IO dedicated to collective security. The very notion of an attack on one equals to an attack on all suggests that even if something is not my problem, I have to get involved in it. I have to pay for it. I have to therefore endure this problem that is not my problem brewing on my soil as well, right? Or that is collective security, right? Or if you have IOs that are more pervasive and deal with issues such as integration, like what we saw in the EU, then that also is something that states are considering. At what cost do I want to achieve integration? At what cost do I want to fall back on the cushion that the EU can provide me economically, diplomatically, right? At what cost do I want to antagonize? Do I want to be part of this IO, even if it antagonizes another power? Say, for example, that's basically what Russia has made demands on relating to Ukraine, right? It wanted, it made these demands. I remember I mentioned this in class to you. It made demands, right, stating that they want to have a veto on Ukrainian membership within NATO, and they also want to be able to have a veto or have a say in Eastern European states seeking membership, right, in these international organizations like NATO, OSCE, for instance. I think NATO in particular, right? That is one of the demands that was put forth, and it was shut down by the UK and the US and by NATO per se, right? And that's why you still see the standoff. I think as of yesterday, I remember reading that they advanced another 14 battalions into Ukraine. So I think as of yesterday, there were like more than 150,000 troops, Russian troops. And then just now, when I woke up, I saw the news bulletin, I think from Foreign Policy. Russia has claimed that it has reduced the number of troops, but the allies, the NATO allies, right, they're basically asking for proof from Russia, right? Please write down somewhere, please, 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 take careful note, of the developments that are occurring before you go for exam, right? You should ensure that you have an updated version of the Ukrainian crisis. Okay. I will update where I can. Like I've mentioned to you all, those who are familiar with my style, right? Even after exams, even after exams, even after the revisions, or like now during the study break, right? when I do come across anything interesting or relevant to your discussions, I will upload it in eGlobal. All right. So maybe every week or every 2 weeks or so, just pop by eGlobal, right? And check and see, if I've updated, if I've uploaded anything. Likely for y'all in particular, there's a very high chance of me uploading stuff because of developments that occur, right? Um, the IR, right? IR is a living, breathing subject. Political science also. Okay, so I will continue to upload. All right, let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's take the break. All right, at this time, I will come back to finish